Great to meet you, everyone. I am going to be walking through a bit of an overview on how we're using Agentic product to build at our venture studio and internally. But I also want to talk about some important things that, when are the right times to think about product agents or even just how you're using AI in your product in general. And that'll segue really nicely into what Martin's going to be talking about, which is a lot more actually building agentic workflows. So you'll get a deep dive after we chat as well. All right. Okay, so how should product teams be working in an agentic world? I know a lot of people are probably hearing the word agents flown around and they're probably experimenting with it themselves. So I want to dive into a little bit more about what that actually means in the context of your product. And we already know that AI makes execution faster, but human product judgment is still something that's so important and wins every time. I promise you, I'm testing so many different AI products, things to help you with workflows, prototyping faster. And one thing I'm noticing is that the human judgment and how we think about what we're building, our solutions and our products, our human thought is what's driving this AI to do its best work. So I don't want to omit that in this process, and I'm going to talk about how these things complement each other. So we're building faster than ever, and we're also failing for the same reasons. I'm seeing founders come into the studio now with, proof of concepts, MVPs. They have a product and they've been able to get to product or market a lot faster, which is fantastic. And it's accelerating that execution. But one thing I'm noticing that is not solving is understanding our customers, finding product market fit, prioritizing the right problems, and building the right workflow. And all of these things might seem obvious and might seem very AI 101, but you would be very surprised how some founders who are even repeat founders with previous exits are using AI, really to learn quickly and get to a certain place. But sometimes we need to take a step back and really evaluate and continue to empathize with our user and put that product thinking motion into play. So the bottleneck has moved, but it didn't totally disappear. So AI in product isn't just one thing. And before we're going to talk about agents, I want to really understand and separate the three different ways that AI is showing up in product. So number one is AI assisted. This is where you're doing the thinking and AI is making it faster. So some examples could be understanding your early product definition, product strategy, your research synthesis, wireframing. These are all ways that AI is assisting us in those processes. There's the agentic workflows where AI is doing the work. You're obviously setting a goal, you're verifying that work, but a lot of great examples are Claude Code, Cursor, Figma Make, QA agents. These are things with defined processes and easily measurable outcomes, and AI is really great at making discernment and judgments based on that. And then there's product agents. So these are actually things that we're building into our products to help people. So this is where your customers are interacting with the AI. And another example of that could be support agents, procurement agents, going and fetching different pieces of information and serving it to you, even moving in and out of other integrations, for example, document processing and agentic onboarding. All of these things that are helping move through processes and take action with and on behalf of the user. We're building these into our products as well. And that's an example of how we can actually create and use agents in the product, not just how we build. So really, there's so many different tools, but we really just have the same questions. Who should own the work? And so when it comes to who's owning the work, is it fully agentic? Is it human in the loop, or is it, started and created by humans? I've developed a bit of an AI product framework to help how we think about this. So I want us to ask ourselves, where does the understanding or context come from before we're making these agentic decisions, and where AI falls into the process? So I've kind of put together a scale here of, where AI is leading all the way to human-led, and sort of what the definition of that would be at each phase. So for automation, which is where AI is executing repeatable work, you could do that with, filling documentation, doing QA, code generation, and structured workflows. So executing repeatable work is really easy for AI because we can say, if then, this is the outcome. It's predictable, and you can also instruct it very easily. So I think binary things are really good for AI, or like very strict reasoning to make decisions is when agents do really, really well. Where you kind of want human plus AI is the category I'm calling accelerate. So AI is strengthening your human thinking here. So it's more of your buddy to work through things, and you can do product definition work really well with AI. Your strategy, your prototyping, and your hypothesis testing. All of this is your thinking, and you're bouncing that ideas off AI in some capacity. It's assisting you in some capacity, but you're driving the outcome. So it's more of like a partnership as opposed to kind of moving autonomously as directed by you. And then another one is like, what's the anchor? So humans create the understanding at this level. And I think this is something that we really want to make sure that we're keeping top of mind and not forgetting. Because if you're not doing this anchor process really well, everything that happens at Accelerate and Automate is going to be garbage. And I don't know how many of you are starting to experience the AI slop situation where you're really not getting very good quality outputs, and it's because you're not creating and doing the work up front to actually give context to enable you to move through these other stages really, really well. And a lot of us are just trying to do things fast, and sometimes we feel like we don't have time to do anchor. And so customer discovery and talking to your users is not something you can get around. If you're going to be selling a product and you don't understand the needs and pains of who you're selling it to, or what's working and what's not working in your product, or how to do customer success really well with really high touch points and learn from that and implement it into your product, AI is not going to be able to do that human relationship management for you. The current and future state process mapping. So I don't know how many product people specifically are in the room, or if you're just an early stage founder, but if you are going to be understanding a current process and how to make it better, I guarantee you're going to come into learning how to do current or future state process mapping. I have done so much work to try and see if AI can do this for me really well. And the answer is I can't get a quality output that supplements me actually walking through a process with my user and mapping it out with them and asking questions. So many edge cases come out of that. So many integration understandings come with that, networks, the ecosystem. There's all this really hyper contextual pieces of data that come from these human conversations that I have not been able to replicate in a really meaningful way with AI yet. And I put prioritization here because, yes, again, it can also be an accelerate category where you have a framework that's helping you prioritize, but ultimately you hold the all-encompassing context of your product and your company, and you're going to be the one that needs to understand what are the strategic roadmaps that you need to hit and how do you actually aid in that prioritization. So I feel like it's always good to check that with yourself, and then we can use AI to accelerate it in other ways. So here's an example of 3 different studio companies that we have built and we're building with this year. And I want to just give examples of these 3 different frameworks. So where Automate came into play, Accelerate, and Anchor. And it's really just kind of identifying like what work AI is owning and where the human loop is coming in. But our first example is a company called EasyOps. So EasyOps does purchase order operations management for retail brands. So what that means is when any brand is going to enter into selling into big box retailers like Walmart, Target, any of those companies, there's a ton of compliance rules that they have to meet in order to even be accepted into the retailer. And if they don't meet those, they receive tons of chargebacks. And so there is a flow that essentially any brand has to go through to get their product onto the shelf. And we're basically helping automate and resolve a lot of things in that workflow so you can do it in a compliant way and maximize your margin and kind of reduce chargebacks. But one thing that we wanted to focus on is really automating and defining this workflow with AI. And so in the product, we're auto processing really routine PO workflows. We have a guidebook that is essentially, here's the rule set for that retailer that we need to abide by. It's continuously being updated. And how do we move a PO or a purchase order through this life cycle in a way that is compliant and correct, and then flagging edge cases for human intervention? This sounds really, in a way, we're like, oh, why couldn't ChatGPT do that? Really, the nuances and complexity web is so great that we had to figure out, how do we build an algorithm and use AI to help us, auto resolve and move things through this workflow, and then reveal what's still left for humans to resolve. In the build process, we needed to validate our accuracy first of a lot of our calculations and numbers, and gut checks against our compliance rulebook. So really, we are automating formatting and presenting that information, but realistically, we can only automate so much, and then we have to be able to build checks on calculations and numbers. Half of that is done with AI, and then obviously you have like a final human review on that too. So for the automate, that's one example. Another one is with a company called Fexel. So Fexel is AI workspace automation for industrial products that are using warehouse layouts. So as an example, if you are a company that has a factory of some sort, there's different automation layouts for conveyor belts and packaging and processing that you would go to a company to be able to tell you how to lay out your factory. And so these consultants and other manufacturing companies need to be able to develop these proposals for their clients in a way that is not taking up too much of their time, because they're very senior engineers that are very skilled in automation of warehouses, and they're developing these detailed 3D renderings, and it's taking a lot of time. So we actually want to figure out, how do we accelerate the work of experts in this case? We want experts to be able to spend less time doing proposals, and we want them to have more time doing the actual work so they can actually close contracts. But how do we get that level of fidelity that we need in a proposal for a client to say yes? So as we did, is we're actually accelerating that process through this product. So in the product, we want to make sure it's generating accurate proposals and project briefs and first drafts. And then the engineers and consultants are refining the final solution. So really, we're accelerating getting to a first view, and we still need their expertise and their eye to kind of tweak some things, put edge cases and parameters in, but it's getting them there in maybe a couple hours as opposed to a couple weeks. And so within the build, we needed to also be able to prototype and iterate something that our design partners could react to. So obviously rapid prototyping came into play here. We could run a lot of closed tests with development and our engineering teams in the back end by using our different 3D components. How are we visualizing 3D components inside of layouts? So being able to use rapid prototyping and all of the different tools with coding and AI to get us to this place really helped us iterate faster with our design partners and understand what a good quality output looked like. So it accelerated for us, and we built that acceleration into the product. And then for provision, so this is a revenue cycle platform for community health organizations. So essentially, we're trying to simplify Medicaid eligibility for billing food as medicine. So this is something new that's happening in the US, where you can actually have billing codes with your insurance to bill food as medicine for specific health issues. And so we actually want to build like an insurance and billing resolution platform around that, so we can have these codes resolved quickly. People can get the medicine that they need, and also the providers can have that billing simplified. So how did this anchor piece come into play? So we really wanted to anchor our understanding before we decided what we were going to automate. There's obviously, in any straight through process, there's tons of opportunities to automate. But here, because of the hyper complexity of insurance billing, there was no way AI was going to help us with that current and future state process map. We had a design partner that deeply understood Medicaid. We sat with them for multiple hours, to be honest, to really understand, how do we understand this web of the current state so we can actually handpick the automation pieces. And And ultimately, humans are managing the denials and these complex exceptions. And so if we don't talk to people to understand that, AI can only surface so many assumptions, but they have to be validated in real life. And so we validated all this with experts, and then we were able to actually flag and put together what was our V1 automation plan going to look like. So every product that I've shown here actually uses all three. I just showed a highlighted example of the automate and the different parts of this workflow, but really the decision wasn't whether or not to use AI. It was more whether AI should lead and where humans are and when. But really, everything's using AI today. That's not something new that you've heard. So it's not if, it's how and when. So I also just want to highlight, here are some of the mistakes that I'm continuing to see founders make, and then hopefully you can avoid some of these pitfalls. But one thing that's continuously coming up is people are building before understanding, as I mentioned. So AI is making it easy to prototype, but you haven't even validated the problem yet. So continue to go out and validate your problem as a real business need and pain, and then you can use all these tools to accelerate. But they're also automating specific judgment calls that should be done with humans in the loop or started with humans. So some work is creating understanding, like I mentioned, and the process maps are a good example of that. That's why I keep coming back to that. But really, you don't want to outsource your learning just for the sake of speed. I feel like sometimes we forget to talk about how AI is doing a lot of things for us, but we're still really intelligent, and that context that we provide is really a part of that secret sauce. And I really don't want us to forget that as we continue to build products and bring them into the world. Because if we forget to empathize with people and forget to understand the problems we're solving, AI can only get us so far. And so we're kind of starting to see that sometimes when we get lazy and kind of what AI slop comes out. But also sometimes we're designing for automation a little bit too early. So we don't want to orchestrate 10 workflows before you've perfected one. Yes, automation is great, but let's really understand like the core job to be done and how we really fulfill that function very, very well before we figure out how can we do more with the speed that we have. And another example I want to highlight is really even the most agentic native teams are really protecting their product thinking. And I want to use an example here of GStack. So for those of you who don't know, GStack is an open source engineering workflow. It was created by Gary Tan, and he's the CEO of Y Combinator. And essentially, the goal of this was to try and figure out how do we create and generate and ship more lines of code faster. And so they did an experiment of trying to ship over 600,000 plus lines of code in 60 days. And at first glance, if you go onto GitHub and you look through GStack, it looks like maybe an argument for how do you replace your product team, but it's actually the complete opposite. And when you look at it, what it actually is 15 different specialized roles. You have combinations of agents and AI assisted flows for all of these different roles in a product team, product manager, engineering, staff engineer, QA, security, CEO, technical writer. These things are already built in, but each role has very specific, clear responsibilities. They have the defined inputs and outputs. They have very limited scope, and they have human checkpoints. So realistically, we're trying to build the things that humans had into these models. And then there's opportunities where we're surfacing gaps that we actually need to provide that input and those quality checks. And so an AI native product function, how that scales into the future and is starting to scale today, and Martin's going to be showing you a little bit about how to actually work in some of those agentic flows, is really product leadership. We're really still focusing on vision, strategy, customer priorities. How do we define the problem that we need to solve? AI can assist, but humans really need to be driving that, because if anybody remembers design thinking principles, empathizing with your user or empathy is the first stage. And I really think humans need to stay involved in that. But the product thinking layer, obviously design, engineering, really great to leverage tools to help us do those things faster. And once we feel like we have a good understanding and we're able to collect the data and make those discerning choices, we can build that checklist into the AI and prototype against that. And then we can also develop all these different agents that help us. What is our internal research function, our design function, coding, QA? All of these things can have agents. And so our product teams are just going to be really excellent orchestrators of agentic tools. And so it's not really like our product team is going to be getting smaller, but we need to become AI specialists in our field. So to wrap all of that up, I have created a Before You Build Claude skill. And so if any of you are familiar with GStack and one of those components is called office hours, really this is just a prompt flow to help you think through various pieces of this product understanding and product lifecycle. And so it's going to prompt and ask you questions. You can drop in documents, you can drop in any context that you have, and it'll help stack rank and evaluate what you have, what you need to do next. Should you put AI in the loop, automate this piece? How do you get to a next step? And is it a pass fail, right? So really helping you put that product thinking first. You can even, talk to your AI and have like stream of thought into this tool. And then hopefully it's just helping you move through, and then you can make the decisions that you need to make with AI. And that's about it. So thank you so much, guys.